Okay. All right. Okay, we are live. I love when technology works. I always start that off like when it was like it's working.
Yes, always a big win.
I don't know about you, Gerardo, but I keep not kicking myself off of the Google Meets in the middle of class, and I'm like, I don't know what I did. But anyway, I just want to welcome you tonight. I am so excited to be having this chat with you. And so, but we started a little bit late, which is okay because you had to order dinner for the family. And I'm just really curious, like, what was the order?
We went ahead and ordered some Thai for delivery, and DoorDash is always a big help. My child was craving Thai, and figured it out. So yeah, it'll be here. Probably not before the interview's over, but it'll be here.
Well, that's good timing if like once we're done and then you can just go eat.
I know, I can just go eat and
Okay,
relax after a fun chat about school.
Yeah, well, before we get into some questions, I want to share a little bit of your bio with everybody. So you are Gerardo Munoz, and you teach high school and middle school social studies at the Denver Center for International Studies at Baker. And your classes include Concurrent Enrollment Ethnic Studies, Advanced Placement World History, and 5280 Challenge Student Board of Education through DPS's Student Voice and Leadership Program. And you've been involved in a number of equity initiatives, including Words of Power, EduColor, Choose, the National Education Association's Racial and Social Justice Conference, and the University of Colorado's Teachers of Color and Ally Summit. Your bachelor's degree is in history and Latin American studies from the University of Colorado. Is that Boulder, Denver?
Boulder.
Boulder, okay. Yep. Go Buffs, all right.
Go Buffs.
And as well as your master's of arts and curriculum instruction from the University of Denver. Go Lynx.
Okay. I think it's Pioneers.
Oh, sorry, go Denver. Sorry, Denver. I'm seeing I've got you in my head.
Yeah.
I apologize to everybody who's watching for that faux pas. Okay. But the reason why you're on is because you are the 2021 Colorado Teacher of the Year. I'm just like, all right.
That's what they tell me.
And I'm just so excited because you are my colleague and my brother from another mother as a DPS educator. And how many years have you been teaching now?
This is year 22. So yeah, it's been a good minute.
Wow. So take me back to that moment when you decided that you wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. This is really cool. I could talk about school all day, and I just really appreciate the stories that you bring to light and the topics. I'm really excited to get into this conversation, but you and your audience will find out that once you get me talking about school, I can't stop, and you might have to get the hook and remove me forcibly. So it was actually not really my it wasn't my initial goal in life to become a teacher. I had been around teachers. My mother is a retired high school teacher. She spent the majority of her career at Adams City High School in Adams District 14. Loved her work there, and just really saw how she saw students for who they really were, and the subtle ways that she was able to identify their talents and their gifts and the things that others maybe didn't always see, and really helped them to build confidence off of that. My dad came here from Mexico in the early 1970s. And, because of the situation in Mexico, he had only attained an education up to 6th grade. That's as far as he was able to get free education, living in the type of poverty that he lived in. But he was a really intelligent and talented soccer player. And so when he got here to the United States, he started coaching soccer. And in fact, he says that he started coaching because I wanted to be on a team, but I think he always wanted to coach. And so just being around people who are always doing the work to help support and lead young people. And particularly in my neighborhood, I grew up in the Five Points neighborhood here in Denver. I went to East Side schools. I went to Mitchell Elementary, went to Cole Middle School, went to Manual High School, Bolts, class of 1994. And watching my dad work with young people who lived in the projects, who were from single parent households, and what soccer was able to do in their lives, both Black and brown children, was really awesome. And I was never one of his better players. But just being around that environment was really cool. Like I always tell him that they have to make a movie about what he did, building up this club from the ground up. And so the work of giving back to the community was just something I grew up with an example of. My mother did everything from starting a community garden, and when people are like, "Who is that goofy granola lady starting a garden and we can just take food?" Like what? Um, to just doing work in the community. They were very politically involved. They worked in elections and volunteered, and I always saw this example of people who are giving back to the community. I didn't really consider being a teacher until I graduated college and I needed a job. And this is where I have to shout out Doris Dempsey. Doris Dempsey is my professional mama whose son was in my wedding. And using that network, she contacted me and said, "Hey, we had a teacher resign. Is your friend interested in teaching?" And I was like, sure, when do I start? And she's like, Monday. And I'm like, I'm not ready to start on Monday. So I went in, I started as a long-term sub at Contemporary Learning Academy. It's a school that will always own a major, major big piece of my heart. This was one of DPS's alternative programs, which we now call Pathways. And the idea is that no matter what we do in schools, there are just some kids who are going to fall behind. There are some kids that are going to struggle. There are some kids whose life circumstances are just going to make it tough for them to attain the high achievements that we'd like them to. And so it was a safety net type school where students could get caught up on their credits, form positive relationships, rediscover a love of learning, and really just get re-engaged with the educational process. I spent 8 years at that school, and I just love those kids so much. It was just so much fun working with them. They are real with you. They don't know how to play the school game. They will tell you if your lesson is trash. They will tell you your lesson is trash, but they'll say it with love. They'll be like, and I remember one day that was really frustrating, where a student said, "Man, Mr. Munoz, this is boring." And I was like, "Now hold on." And he said, "Hey, don't get mad. I believe in you. You can make it better." and shout out to Tremaine. But it was just such a wonderful community because we were all kind of on the same page. Like the students wanted to be successful. I have never met a young person who walked through my door that did not want to succeed. 100% of young people who walk through your door every day want to succeed. And Doris taught me that. And honestly, after the first semester, it was really hard. I'm so tired. Like I'm like putting my head down to like take a nap during my planning period because it's taking so much out of me. And then I got into DPS's teacher in residence program. It was the first kind of formalized alternative licensure program that was in partnership with Metro State College at the time, Metro State University now. That was essentially on-the-job training. If you can believe this, we had a major teacher shortage back in the late 90s, and you maybe remember this. And it was just really tough to find people to take teaching jobs. And so I applied to the program. I'm like, okay, even if I don't get in, like I think I love this teaching thing. I think I want to do it. I think I'm gonna go back to school for real. And I got in, and it's just a really interesting thing for me to reflect on because I didn't go through any traditional routes to become a teacher. I went from being in college and hanging out with my Black and brown classmates, the few that were at CU at the time, and just telling them the stuff I knew about history. And I remember one kid like telling me, "Yo, man, you could be a teacher. Like I listen to you, I'll listen to other people," And so it was one of those things that kind of, I was like, yeah, I really want to do this, but I didn't take a traditional route. And I think most folks would tell you that I'm not a traditional teacher. I don't teach in ways that people, that people recognize. It's like, oh, what is this? Is really interesting. So yeah, I kind of stumbled into it, but I would probably say that I came from an environment that trusted the educational process, rightly or wrongly, and from an environment and a family culture that was about giving back to the community. And I think that's what kind of, it made the soil fertile for me to become a teacher. And it's wild that I've entered my third decade of this work. It's just like, where does the time go? But I guess time flies when you're having fun.
That's such a beautiful story to hear your timeline. And I'm so glad that you decided to stick with it, because we still have a teacher shortage. A lot of school districts across the nation are closing right now, just because they're concerned about having subs and things like that. And so I think that's a great testament to the fact that you fell into your passion. Some people, know early on, and then you kind of grew into it because you were exposed. And also being a male teacher, it's a female dominated profession, and we really do need and value strong male academics to be there in front of our young people. And especially in DPS, it's like the best fertile ground for educators like you and I. And this is my 27th year, and it's like, oh, I can do this. I was telling someone, like, I've lived through 9/11. I remember the day I was like in class on 9/11. I was a young teacher at George Washington High School, like baby teacher.
Yep.
And then we had Columbine,
Yep.
right? And now COVID. And it's like, whoa, how much can you pack into a career? And so I'm so glad that you've stuck with it, because, at this point in our careers, we get more tools in the toolbox, right? And
sure.
You start to learn that those relationships and that unconventional way of reaching our community is valuable. And that's, once we can reach them and get them, then we can give them the content and the tools that they need in order to be successful.
Yeah. And I would add that I've been super blessed in my path, because there are lots of male teachers of color who start the work and then they end up leaving. Just the conditions can be really difficult, particularly for our Black male teachers. But I've always been really blessed to have incredibly supportive fellow educators around me. My first principal, Linda Huxama, ruined me for the next 10 years of principals. She was terrific. She put in the work. She cared about every teacher in the building. She had the most humbling feedback conversations, but you would walk out of there feeling like, I just sat with one of the wisest educators I've ever known. And I feel a little like torn down, but I also feel really inspired, because there's so many things to do, and just so many people along the way that have just been incredibly generous with their knowledge, with their ideas, with their skills, listening to me like get frustrated about whatever it is I'm frustrated with that day. And I think that having that really strong community around me has really been why I'm still here. And now I'm not going anywhere. Now I love the work so much, and I'm not going to leave.
And I mean, you make a great point about the leadership around us and those supports as we're growing. And because you gave a shout out, I have to give a shout out to my principal, because he may be watching, Dr. Christian Sawyer. I love him so much. He's such an amazing principal, and I would never go anywhere. And I told him, like, if you ever leave, you have to let me know, because I'm going wherever you go. And he makes it where I want to go to work, right? And I think that's the thing with any workplace. If you have a good supervisor, you'll walk on hot coals for them, right? You're like, what do you need me to do? There's no time limit. I'll do whatever you want me to do.
That's right. Well, it's a human field of work, and as long as we're doing shout outs, I'm going to shout out Dr. Dan Lutz, who hired me at the Denver Center for International Studies, who's this crazy brown dude who's telling jokes that only half of the group is laughing at. And my current principal, Marisa Vasquez, who is a first-year principal, and you would never know it. This sister is crushing it, and had that conversation with her. I'm like, wherever you go, that's where I'm going to be. And it's like that old Michael Rappaport thing: hard body karate. I'm here. So yeah, no, leadership matters, and people used to think I had a real problem with authority, but it isn't that. I've come to the realization that actually my expectation of leadership is so high that that it leads me to some moments of frustration, and so I think I have a lot of respect for people who lead schools. I'm not going to do that, but I have a lot of respect for people who do.
So let's get into some hard questions.
Yeah.
Okay, because we've been teaching a long time.
Long time.
And we've seen a lot of changes. You know, you've seen changes in 22 years. I've seen a lot of changes in 27 years. Like I
Yep.
never thought when I was, 21 years old that my career would look the way it looks right now. So what are some of the changes that some of the hurdles that you've had to cross over?
Yeah. I think probably the biggest hurdle that exists in my brain is probably the intensified accountability measures and those kinds of expectations. It's not that I have a problem with accountability. Teachers like you and me, we come into the room and we're 200% every day, right? Like I feel accountable, and it's not to a principal, and it's not to a newspaper story, and it's not to an evaluation framework. My accountability is to my students, right? But what I've seen that has been really difficult to navigate for a lot of us is how we sort of leverage accountability in order to benefit our students in a way that respects who they are and where they come from. And I think that's a really challenging thing. And so what I have seen is I've seen great teachers walk away from the work um, because they feel like no matter what they do, they're not successful in the eyes of an evaluator. And maybe I'm just stubborn in this way. Like I've just never worried too much about an evaluator's critique. Like I think one of the strengths that I bring into this work is an ability to learn from anyone. And so you can give me a whole bunch of nonsense in a 1 hour long feedback conversation. If you give me one nugget of like something useful, I'm going to feel like that was a good conversation. But I do think some of the ways in which the profession is attempting to measure effective teaching and what does that look like, um, I think that that's been really difficult for everybody involved to sort of to deal with. I think the rise of digital social media has posed some challenges. It's one of these things that I view as a double-edged sword, right? So on the one hand, my students are walking into my class having read a lot more information, whether it's reliable information or not. They've just read a lot more information than when I started teaching. When I started teaching, everything a student knew about the world outside of the school was either taught to them directly by their parents or they learned it in my classroom. And so it felt like a tremendous burden at that point because it's like, I got to make sure I get all this stuff right because this might be the last time it gets talked about in this young person's life. Well, now they're coming in with a deluge of information. They just have seen so many things. And so now it's about, okay, I'm not necessarily feeding you like knowledge. Now the job is to teach you ways to find good knowledge and think about it and evaluate it and make arguments and do that kind of thing. And so I think the intellectual work of teaching, particularly in secondary, like middle school and high school, especially as students are starting to find their identities and starting to think about who they are and what they really believe. I think that work has become really, really complex because you'll just have a kid drop something from a meme in the chat, like this is what we're doing right now. And it's like, oh, that's an interesting point. Let's dig into it. And so, but I think it's really changed a lot of what our work looks like. Just the fact that they have all of this information at their fingertips and it's so easy to get to, and they have fewer and fewer hesitations about where to kind of put it out there. But I'm kind of like you, like when I got hired for my first job in November of 1999, like teaching doesn't look anything like it looked like back then. And I think we don't always recognize when the really dramatic changes are coming. I think definitely No Child Left Behind represented a major transformation in the way that our work was approached and evaluated. But frequently, we don't actually know what that looks like until much later on. I'm very curious as to what it's going to look like after this.
Well, you mentioned assessment. So that's a great segue into this question because like last spring, we didn't have to do CMAS. It's questionable if we're going to have standardized testing right now. So what do you think would be the most effective way for us to evaluate learning during this time? Because it's so inequitable, right?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I've always been of the view that a lot of standardized testing that we do is pretty unreliable as a single data point, right? So if we look at one data point and we say, oh, okay, so we have X percentage of students not meeting in math, well, clearly our math instruction is bad. And I think there's something that you can extrapolate from a data point like that. But I think that for me in the data work that I've done, it's about how do we assemble as complete a picture as possible of what a student experiences in school and what they actually will need going forward. So in terms of that, I this might be controversial. I'm not totally against standardized testing. I think that it has a norming quality that can be useful as we look at our students. And, you know, I would be lying to you if I said that when I get my class roster for AP World History, a class that aims to get them prepared for collegiate level rigor, I'd be lying if I said, oh, I don't even look at those scores. I do look at those scores because it tells me something. Now, maybe it doesn't tell me what I think it tells me. Maybe a low reading score just tells me that they didn't feel like taking the test that day. And young people don't always make the best decisions when it comes to those kinds of things in the moment. Maybe it does tell me that there's a major reading issue. So it's a thing to kind of file away. But I'm a big believer in having sort of a set of proficiencies of competencies. And so it's a little bit different from standards in the sense that competencies can be designed pretty locally. And, you know, in general, I think that schools need to work towards responding to the needs in their own communities, right? That I think that, yes, we can standardize certain things. Yes, we can have national standards around content. But I think at the end of the day, communities are probably the best equipped to know what they want for their students going forward. And the students in those communities are in a position, everything they do is contextualized within that culture, right? And so I love proficiencies. My school has a set of global leadership domains. And so, for example, there's one called Investigate the World, one is Recognize Perspectives, one is Take Action, and one is Communicate Ideas. And so what we found is that the more we kind of dig into those things, well, how well do you communicate ideas? How confidently do you take action when there's an issue? And that can be an issue of something happening in the world. It can be an issue of bullying that's happening like right in your very classroom. So how do we take action around those things and how do we inform those actions? So I'm a big believer in a body of evidence. I'm a big believer in, well, what are we prioritizing for this community? How does it provide them the opportunity to be free people when they leave our schools? And how do we then track their progress towards that kind of proficiency? So, like I said, you know, tests are fine for certain things, but I think that if we're going to support the whole child, we do have to start thinking about what does the community need and what are the actual proficiencies in the early 21st century in COVID. And we're going to have some major gaps. You know, we have major gaps now, but we are going to have some major gaps in some of the data when we come out on the other side of this, and it's just going to be a pretty interesting adventure, I think.
There's so many nuggets in what you just like. I was like, yes, 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 yes. Okay, so yeah, when we're looking at formative and summative assessments in our own classrooms, we have a lot more control because we know the standards that we've been teaching. And so we can look for and gather that data. I was a principal in Alaska,
Hey.
in the bush. And if anybody knows anything about the bush, it's like off the road system. And I was in this Yupik Eskimo village in the lower Yukon, where you know, they became a state in the 1950s. So this is a generation of young people who were not proficient in Yupik, but they're also not proficient in English because they had this like hybrid of a generation of being forced to speak English and not be able to speak their language. So when we would get the standardized tests, and I was also on the DPS Reimagine the SPF committee where we had these conversations about what we had control over as far as rating schools and what the federal and state laws were. But there would be a question on the standardized test, like Sally was walking on the sidewalk going wherever, right? And the students were like, what's a sidewalk, right? Because in off the road system in these villages,
They're like, what was
There's no
that?
sidewalks, right?
What is that? I don't know what this is, miss.
Right, I don't know what this is. So like when we start to dissect, and you understand this, questions, how questions are formed on standardized assessments, are we creating a bias for students in different parts of America who may have different lived experiences? And are we really truly getting to the heart of their understanding of content? And you mentioned these core values. I teach in an IB school, right, where we have, you know, core values. And someone made a great point of, you know, when you apply for your first job, nobody asks you like what kind of grades you got. They want to know what your skill set is. Like what have you done? What projects have you worked on, especially in education? Like tell me about a time, you know, when you were with a difficult parent or you had a student who get like, it's never about what classes did you take and like what were your grades. It was like
What did you
real.
get on the SAT? Like, I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, how important is it now? No
Yeah,
one's ever asked me what my grades are. So I
yeah,
think maybe during this time when we're talking about like reimagining what is education looking like, are we really teaching the right skills like to our
right.
students? Yeah, we definitely want to stick to the basics. Like they have to learn how to read, they have to learn how to comprehend, they have to learn how to do math. I mean, unless the federal laws change, like that's going to be what's driving everything. But how are we really truly preparing our young people for a future where they can actually thrive? And I think, you know, for those elected officials who are policymakers, you know, they have an opportunity now to kind of rethink what they want us, how they want the education system to look.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that it's sort of it takes a little bit of courage, right? To, you know, especially when we're talking about elected officials. Education is one of those things that is really easy to get people fired up about, but really hard to get people to reflect on, you know. And so, you know, I mean, I think this is why test scores have really obtained kind of a disproportionate sort of visibility in how we assess the educational system. Not saying that they're invalid, but I think that they've definitely taken up more space than what maybe they merit at times. And I think a lot of it has to do with that's just an easy thing that you can say to students. Look, our math scores went up, so keep funding us, right? But I love what you say because, you know, as we are working with students, like, first of all, when we get students back in buildings, they are going to be so happy to be in school. And that was not the case on March 12th, right? And so they're going to come with a completely different outlook on being in a school building and what a school community is. And so, you know, how do we prepare for that? And how do we prepare for the fact that, and you're in a middle school, like we have 6 through 12. Our middle schoolers, they aren't going to do anything that first day back. They're going to come in, they're going to be so happy to see each other. There's going to be the screaming and hugging and like all that kind of stuff, right? And so we do have this opportunity to think, what are the ways that we have been harmed by these nationwide shutdowns, and what are the ways that I mean, so I was talking to my wife about this like a few weeks ago. You know, when you get married, you take these vows, right? This for better or for worse. And I was like looking at her, I was like, this is the for worse. like, like, like it is a global trauma that everybody is dealing with. And like, these are the hard times that really define what people are going to create and what people are going to become. And like, I think it's important to be aware of that. And it's like, well, how do we get here? And what will we need? What is healing going to look like after this? And I think that's going to be a really powerful thing. So yeah, I'm with you. I think that idea of rethinking just how we do things, what has been business as usual and what isn't good enough anymore. Do we have the courage to walk away from it and build something new? I hope we do.
Well, we'll be here when it happens.
That's right. We'll be here when we'll be here.
We still have to pay the bills. So like we teach in an urban district, and it looks very much like a lot of big urban districts. And we know and we see the really sad data within the BIPOC community. I don't like to, well, I've stopped comparing Black and brown students to white students, because being white is not the benchmark. We know that, right? The standard is the benchmark. And so I want to say, why are our Black and brown students not showing the same level of proficiency um, with with the standards? Like, why are they falling so far below? This is the big conversation we've had. I've actually had Dr. Bailey on, and we did a whole hour on the Black Excellence Resolution. I was one of the teachers that had a one-on-one with her as a Black educator in DPS. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart, because we all go through different things in our career and as students that make us feel less than. That it takes that one teacher to make us feel like you're really smart, you're really capable, I believe in you, and I'm gonna take a little extra time for you, right? The only reason why I'm here is because I can think of those few teachers along the way, those key teachers who noticed I was there and were like, you know what, you really, you're a good student and you're smart and you're capable, and I'm going to do a little bit extra for you.
Talented musician.
Pardon?
Talented musician, right?
Well, I don't want to brag. My husband's actually the musician, because he has
Okay.
a career full time. I'm a teacher, but I have a big passion for teaching music,
Yeah.
for sure. But let's break down, because I really I love having this conversation around the disparity, because at some point we have got to fix this. I think I don't want to see another generation of students not being able to read, and we're graduating. Like, this is what's weird. Like, we can graduate 70 or 80% of our Black and brown students, but their proficiency is like 30 or 40%. Like, that doesn't make sense, right? We're socially promoting kids because we have to, but man, we've got to stop the bleeding. And so talk to me at some of the conversations that you've had in your work around the disparity.
Yeah. So I went to a school that, obviously in the 5 Points neighborhood. I went to Manual High School. Shout out to any of my Bolts who are watching right now. Manual was a really interesting place because I think it was one of those schools that was integrated, just like a lot of schools across DPS. But within the walls of the school, it was very segregated. And so when I took AP and accelerated classes, as a high school student, I was typically the only non-white person in my section, or maybe one of only two. And I even had internalized a lot of these racist views of my own community. I came up in 5 Points. I grew up at 30th and Humboldt. I was born at St. Joseph's Hospital. Like, I am from the East Side, like all from top to bottom. And it didn't take me long to figure out that the smart classes were the ones with the white kids. And the classes that were behind, the classes that weren't going to push you, the classes that were going to make me feel less smart, were the classes with my BIPOC classmates. And so that's a problem that still kind of continues today, that we have a lot of segregation within schools. Who is offered what courses? We have a lot of antiquated notions about who should be challenged in school and who shouldn't. And so I think part of it is opening ourselves up to different ways that students are intelligent, and understanding, like that funny kid who always disrupts your class. Like, humor is one of the highest forms of intelligence that you can actually find. A person that can crack a joke and make people laugh, like, that's a level of both social and cognitive intelligence that's just on another level. And so I think when we talk about these gaps, I think, to your earlier point, I think we need to start looking at some of the assessments. What is it that we're assessing? How are we assessing? Are we asking, indigenous people from Alaska to talk about a sidewalk, right? Is that part of what's happening in these assessments? But I would honestly say, and I really think people are generally pretty unsatisfied when I give this answer. We have to engage our communities of color. We have to engage our communities of color. We have to be able to say to our BIPOC communities that when you come into this building, we're going to do everything to get you excited about obtaining your education. we're gonna have you excited to walk into every single class, whether it's math, language arts, science, social studies, elective, music, wherever it is that you're going. We are committed to just getting you excited about what you're doing, because one thing that I have noticed is that even my students who weren't strong readers, for example, and I've never taught math, but I would imagine that a similar formula applies. When you get them excited about a topic, they're willing to punch above their Lexile. They're willing to say, hey, I'm really interested in this topic. And I can give them a book and say, all right, so for book clubs, I want you to try this book. It's going to be kind of hard, but it's about exactly what you want to learn about. And, I got a student, I taught a hip hop studies class a couple of years ago. I got a group of students to read Dr. Michael Eric Dyson's biography of Tupac Shakur. And first of all, they were super excited about Pac. And you talk about a name that has stayed with us for over a generation. Like, young people today have barely heard his music and he's still like this icon. That's a hard book. It is academic. Dr. Dyson goes on and on and on with his kind of academic language, and the students push through it, and they did this incredible project around it. So I really think that the first thing we need to do is take those things that we already have. We have standards, we have curriculum. A lot of schools have core values and competencies. We just have to align our work to those competencies in really authentic and meaningful ways for students. When students come to me and complain about classes, they don't say, well, X class, I hate it because it's hard. They're like, I hate it because it's boring and I don't feel engaged and it doesn't feel relevant. And we have to remember that with young people, if it doesn't feel relevant, they're not going to invest time into it. They may not make the best, like, they're not going to look at it and say, well, actually, if I work hard at math, I have a better chance of performing well in the SAT and getting into college that I would like and having a career that, they're not thinking that way. We want them to, some do. We want them to think that way, but that's not what they're thinking about. They're like, what can get me excited right now? So I think that'd be the first thing. I think the second thing is, in public schools across the country, we need to ensure that we are assembling a teaching force that is representative of the communities that are served there, and also that is representative of the communities that our students are likely to meet when they leave school. Students in the city of Denver, like, a lot of them are going to go to college, to community colleges, trade schools, that kind of thing. And they're going to have to sort of like deal when they kind of get out there. So what we need to do is also create a teaching force that is actually going to inspire and motivate students. Early in this conversation, you kind of mentioned my role as a male of color. My good friend Kevin and I, we host a podcast. We refer to ourselves as unicorns. We're Black and brown men of color who teach. And people have heard of them. They think they may exist. Some have even claimed to have seen one. And so we kind of identify as unicorns. But I think of the powerful relationships that Kevin, as a Black male, has established, especially with the young Black men in our school. And if they didn't have him, I'm just not sure that they would have had an advocate, because let's be honest, people who don't have familiarity with Black communities don't tend to approach Black communities with a lot of empathy, with a lot of kindness, with a lot of support. There's been a lot of research around this, the ways in which BIPOC students are heavily sanctioned for behaviors that maybe aren't as harshly punished in white students. So I think diversifying the teaching force is just, it's of the utmost importance right now. I'm finally in a school that's 25% teachers of color, and I never thought that would happen. I was the only one for such a long time. But I think those are the things that we can do tomorrow to start closing those gaps that you refer to and help students feel confident and accomplished when they go to school. I think that systemically, we got to start looking at community schools. We need to start looking at schools that are conceptualized and built and operated with a community initiative, saying that we are here in the spirit of service to our communities, and we are here for you. We are your tool for success. You are not our tool to bigger funding or a nicer building. We are your tool to success. How do we start listening to you and meeting the needs in your communities? Because I don't buy some of this rhetoric that you hear that Black and brown families they don't value school. They don't want kids to be successful. I don't buy that. I've had too many Mexican moms show up in my door asking questions about my grade book during class to believe that, right? And so what we have to be able to do is respect these communities, that they all want their students, their young people to be successful, and then actively become partners in that success.
Wow, so many more nuggets again. Okay, so where did I start? First, let me start with like your excitement. Of course. Okay, so I don't know if you've read Culturally Responsive Education by Zaretta Hammond.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that book
Amazing.
because the first thing she talks
Right.
about is like ignite, right?
Yep.
The amygdala, like ignite. And so that's so important. I've totally like redone all of my lesson plans to have like an ignite to create that safety for them, and then breaking it down, chunk to review, ignite, chunk to review, right? Such a key thing to keep them excited, keep your lessons relevant. But I'm so glad you mentioned community schools, because I think that that is a concept that's really catching on, that is going to be supported when we talk about policymakers. I think that's a concept that is supported by so many policymakers, that we should be talking more about how valuable community schools are. And I think that's a great idea. Oh my gosh, so many good nuggets. Okay, where do I've got my questions right here. Like, don't forget to ask.
Yeah.
Let's see. So, you kind of went into my how do we begin to address the education gaps? I mean, obviously, we know kids start testing in third grade. That's where we start to see a turning point and the disparities start to rise. But I'm really glad that the conversation around stopping this gap from growing, because we've seen the gap. Yeah, well, students are performing better, but the gap seems to be getting wider, and that doesn't make any sense. And so I think you're right. It does start with our attitude towards the students in the communities that we're teaching in, and starting in a place where we believe and expect our students to do well. You talked about students saying, wow, this is hard, right? So we've been in the second quarter. I have a whole new group of students second quarter. And the day, it was like last week, where a student said, Miss, this is hard. And I smiled. I was like, yes, right? Because, I want them to persist through. Like, that's such a key thing for our students to get to that point where they have to struggle a little bit, but not to the point where they quit, but that they have to persevere. And that is such an important thing for our young people to learn, is to, well, there's a word that someone says, if I hear that word one more time, it's, I can't think of it, but it has to do with like persisting and not quitting. But it was a buzzword.
Oh, are you talking about grit?
Grit. Yeah, that's what it's like. If I hear the word grit one more time, right? Okay, I'll say persist.
Yeah. Yeah. Persist, be resilient, like those
Be
kinds of.
resilient. But it is a quality and a character trait that really does separate the people who succeed in life, because like here we are in this COVID environment that we were never trained to use this technology. And look, you and I, we persisted through, and we're professionals at Zoom, and like now it's like,
and some of it is making a big deal at a district PD about, why do y'all get Google Suite? Why can't I have Google Suite? Get Google Suite.
No, right? It's like, because you and I grew up in that generation where we like if we had to do a research paper, we had to go to the card catalog in the library.
Oh yeah.
Catalog, pull out the paper, write down the date, and we're on the honor system. Stick the the paper back inside, like
the book,
and actually read
actually read it. I've thought about this a lot. Can you imagine if COVID had hit when we were in high school? Like, what are we talking about at this point? Like, and that's the thing, that when we talk about where we are as a human race, like I think that we are capable of doing so many more things than we were capable of doing before. Like, the students ask me, they're like, Munoz, you're like 60, right? I'm like, no, I'm not, but your point is taken. And they're like, if COVID had happened to you, what would have happened? I'm like, there wouldn't have been any school. There would not have been any school. They're just like, what are we going to do? Mail assignments in? Like, so I think that it is interesting. Like, we're in this environment that is just, it's, I mean, unprecedented. That's another word that everyone's using to describe it. But yeah, it's really hard. And I think that that's been one of the things that I just name when I'm working with my students, where it's just kind of like, y'all, this is really tough, but fortunately, we're all really tough too, and we're just gonna figure it out. And I'm gonna create breakout rooms that are a disaster one day, but they're gonna be better tomorrow. And I'm just trying some stuff, so just come along with me while I try stuff, and I'm gonna encourage you to try stuff too. And I hope that that shows them that it's okay to push yourself a little bit and to take a little bit of a risk, because if a risk works out, I mean, you're just on cloud nine. And then the other thing that I told a couple of colleagues, because I think this has been really hard on teachers, we have a notion of how successful we can be as teachers. And even though everyone keeps telling us, be kind to yourself, it's a pandemic, like it's just not going to feel as good as usual. Like we are driven by that personal integrity that we just want to be the best teachers no matter what the situation. And so I was telling some of my coworkers, I'm like, well, yeah, but even if you fall on your face, it's because you're going forward. You can't fall on your face going backward, factually. And so, and that's just an ethic that I've had to really, I mean, that's always been my ethic as a teacher. I've never viewed myself as a perfect person with all the answers. I viewed myself as somebody who's going to try some stuff and see if it works. And, if the stuff that I try works, I'm going to keep it. If it doesn't work, I'm going to reflect on it and maybe not do it the same way next time. But I think that's the biggest opportunity with our young people today, is to say, this might be the hardest. I hope this is the hardest thing you go through in your lifetime. Because if there's harder stuff, then I'm a little nervous, to be honest with you. But this might be the hardest thing you go through in your lifetime. So, fall forward. It's going to be okay. And we're a community. You're not alone.
I love what you said. When I was going through my national boards, they said a master teacher is not a perfect teacher. A master teacher is a reflective teacher. And as long as you're constantly reflecting and you're humble and you're trying to learn and grow, you're going to be in this for the long haul. So I'm going to ask you a controversial question. Oh. Well, I'm just curious to see what you think, because everybody has a different viewpoint on like what you think the role of a teacher is. Some people think we're a babysitter. Yeah. Some people think we should feed them and we should be the second parent. That can be looked at in a positive way or a negative way. But like, what do you see the role is of a teacher? And then what do you think the role of the government should be in education?
Oh yeah, those are good questions. So I'll take the role of the teacher. I don't know. It's hard for me to say because, I really, so my school has about 40 classroom teachers right now. I might be in the top 25% in terms of like skill and talent as a teacher. And every single really effective and powerful teacher that I know just does it differently, right? So there's this chemistry teacher who I just love. Like, I'll even show up to his Google Meets because like I'm bored and my grading's done. I'm like, I'm gonna go see what Connor's doing. This dude will be like teaching about the periodic table wearing like a shark mask. And he knows if I can get my students to laugh and to smile, it's easier to get them to do the hard work. Like, they have a better attitude, they feel safe with me. So some teachers do that. And I think there's a part of me that is kind of that entertainer. Probably the most important thing I ever did for my teaching profession was do high school drama for 4 years. And it taught me to get out of my stutter. It taught me to act like I knew what I was doing, even if I was falling apart inside. And it taught me how to be an authentic and true communicator. I don't think a teacher can authentically communicate something that they don't believe. So I've had people ask me, well, how are you able to show so much care to your students? I'm like, well, that's easy. I actually care about them. Like I can't do something that isn't true for me. I think the role of a teacher in my experience has been to help illuminate the gifts that students have. I'm a parent, and obviously my child is the most incredible human being that's ever walked the earth. And you can't tell me anything about her because she is amazing. But I also know that somebody who isn't a part of our immediate family circle and a trusted adult in a school might be able to see things in her that even I as a parent may not always notice. Like when they say, your kid's really organized. And I'm like, really? Like how? And they're like, well, let me show you this wild Google folder they made for their student board of education work and that kind of thing. So I think that teachers are uniquely positioned to ensure that every student is seen. And I honestly think that every single student has talent. Every kid has talent. It's a matter of whether we are paying attention long enough to identify it. Um, I took this from what I learned as a soccer coach. I coach middle school soccer. We could talk about some of the storied games between DCIS and Hamilton back in the day. We had some great games. Y'all gave us the worst loss that I ever had as a coach, and also we got our best win over y'all. So it's like that whole thing. But one thing I learned from coaching was that most athletes need to know that there are things that they do well and to build on those things. Most of the time, tearing them down and then trying to build them up in whatever I think they should be, like that's just a non-starter. I have to see what your strengths are, and then I have to be able to help you build off of those strengths. So I think that's been how I approach teaching. Give me something. Give me a little tiny thing that's a strength, and I'm going to turn that into your entire superpower. Like it's helping you find your superpower. And
Leverage that strength. Yep.
yeah.
Leverage it.
Well, and it's funny with parents, parents are funny, like especially high school parents will be very sarcastic about their kids because that tends to be kind of the relationship. And I remember saying to a parent, I was like, this young man has a real special talent for communicating and making people hear him. And the parents were just like, and I was like, yeah. It's like, well, he doesn't talk to us at home. And so a lot of times we are seeing a different version of the students when they're away from their parents. And I think that is one of the things that we can name in our students and, give them the opportunity. When you come into my classroom, I'm going to blow sunshine all over the place about you. And, I'm going to help you find that talent and that gift. And if it takes a while, then we're going to find it together. But I really think that that's, in a world, I talked about social media earlier. Social media is like wrecking young people's self-concept. It's causing them to see themselves in just unreasonably critical ways and just really tears them down a lot. And so for me, the role of my classroom is that you're going to walk out of my classroom feeling like you are somebody and feeling like you can do things and feeling like despite the struggles that you do actually have something specific that makes you powerful.
What about the government? How should we, it's changed over the decades and centuries. What do you think the role of the government should be in education?
It's funny because I think so. There's a couple of things that I love about this country. We as a country are culturally audacious in the sense that we actually believe that everybody should get educated. Like we actually believe that. There are highly industrialized kind of first world countries that don't necessarily believe that about their population. And I remember when I was at DU taking a history of education course, a history of higher education course from Dr. Malika McKee Culpepper, who's one of my favorite humans that's ever walked the earth. And she pointed out that where some countries have like dozens or hundreds of universities and institutions of higher education, we have thousands, right? And she says that, for whatever the faults are in our entire ECE through graduate school pipeline, we have this fundamental belief that everybody should get educated. And I think that's a really powerful thing. Now, when it comes down to government educational policy, honestly, I've been a voter for almost 25 years, and which means I've been paying attention for 20 years. But no, I've always voted, never missed an election. But what I've kind of noticed is that a lot of federal educational policy, agnostic to party, just doesn't feel super relevant at home, right? So when I was talking to a friend of mine that teaches out on the Eastern Plains, and I was asking them, because, one of the things that came up as Colorado Teacher of the Year is that, you're going to have to represent all teachers, not just teachers in big cities. And so I started reaching out to people that I knew, and I was talking to this teacher and they were telling me, what a lot of people don't understand about us out here is that we're not used to so much attention being on our school district because we're a really tiny district. We're out here on the plains. We serve mostly the children of farmers and agricultural workers and people who are going to move into agriculture and agribusiness as they get into adulthood. But now we have a lot of migrant workers whose kids have moved out here and they've brought their families because they like our schools. Well, now we have all this pressure to do all these different things for all these different folks. And, I just think that the federal government struggles to understand what's happening in communities. So whether we're talking about No Child Left Behind, it's a great idea. What does that look like on a local level? Race to the top, that's great. What if you don't make it to the top? What if you're on the bottom? What if you can't find the ladder? And so when educational policy is formed, it frustrates me because it's kind of like, okay, well, here's another thing that that we don't understand. Maybe Oprah will give a whole bunch of money to our school. I don't know, but it's kind of hard to talk about what federal education policy is. So what I really believe the federal government's role when it comes to education is to really ensure that the needs of communities are being met. And if that means sort of earmarking those educational dollars that are supposed to go to schools for other things, you find ways to support important community initiatives. So let's say that your school is in a neighborhood that exposes students to like toxic waste, right? Not saying there's anything like that in Denver, right? So maybe that community initiative becomes, we really need to ensure that these students are safe from the environment that they live in. My good friend Jessica Matthews, who was Michigan Regional Teacher of the Year in Flint, Michigan, talks about the water crisis and how students really started organizing around that. And as soon as they knew that adults were listening and hadn't forgotten about them, they were doing high-level research. They were writing persuasive arguments. They were making phone calls to Board of Education members and things like that. So I really think that the federal government has to reflect on how do we empower communities that have schools that they can be proud of? How do we do that? What do communities need? Where have people been historically underserved? If you are in a community that was a red line district in Denver, then, and that's the thing is that I forgot to say, the testing data that we have, it's predictive. It's predictable based on zip code, right? You can anticipate, so if you're in that zip code, in the old SPF system, you're probably a green or a blue school. This zip code, red, orange, maybe yellow if it was a good year. And so I think that we need to empower communities to not feel stuck in this cycle of underperformance, that we're actually going to be here to provide material support so that you can meet your community's needs. So if it sounds like I think that the federal government doesn't have a major role in setting policy, I just don't think it does. I think that, basic skills like you referred to earlier, I think basic skills are important. I think an understanding of how the system of government functions, I think that's something that's good nationally. But in general, what are the needs of the community and how does the federal government work to support those things?
Wow. Okay. Very articulate.
Support, but let us do our thing, right?
Right. I mean, what you're saying is there's no one size fits all, right? I mean, so like we have to really differentiate what we're doing in education and meeting the needs of families and communities are very different within even a state.
Yeah.
There's a lot more power locally and statewide that impacts us versus federally. But
folks where we live aren't thinking about the same things that folks teaching on the Western Slope are thinking of, and folks living there aren't thinking about the same things that folks on the reservations in Ignacio are thinking about. Like it's just different. And if the goal is that every young person is able to emerge from their ECE through 12 education as a free person, then it has to be differentiated, as you say. Like education has to prepare students to be free people.
Oh, I love that.
Has to do.
Wow.
That's bell hooks. That's bell hooks. Yeah, education. So and it's funny. I get kind of a hard time with my students because they're kind of like, I'm going to be late on an assignment. I was like, okay, when are you going to have it in? And they're like, when do you want it in? I'm like, when can you have it in? They're like, when do you want it in? I'm like, when can you have it in? I'm like, this is circular because I need you to own this. Free people own things. So, and they're like, tomorrow. I'm like, okay, let me stop you there for a second. What happens if you don't get it into me tomorrow? Oh, yeah, I'll feel really bad. So I need you to give me a goal that you can actually meet. Honestly, Mr. Munoz, I have to work tonight and tomorrow night. I got to take care of my little sister. So probably not before Friday. Friday it is. But it's those conversations, and like, I could just decide for you, but we don't need a system that continues to engage in patronage of its clients, right? We need a system that is going to empower people to make decisions and be free and to own those decisions. So yeah, practice of freedoms. That's how we practice freedom in my class.
I love being free.
Yep,
I love,
yep.
I value, look at the flag, I
I
value.
mean, right? Exactly.
So let's talk about someone who I think, I'm just going to assume, is very special to both of us, and that's our superintendent, Susanna. And I know that you taught her children.
Yes.
You hold a very special place in her heart. I have a lot of respect for her as a veteran educator, as a woman, as a Latina, a woman of color, as a mom. I mean, like, she is doing it, right? She's doing everything. And we got the really sad news that she's leaving. And I was like, wow, she had a really hard 2 years. I mean, coming in with the strike, right? And now with COVID, and it's just like, wow, she couldn't catch a break, what do you think that means for our students? Because I'm concerned, because when we talk about, our students being taught by someone that looks like them in their community, and for the first time in a long time, like the highest person in our district looks like you and I, right? Like we can relate to, and there's a certain level, not that she can't lead everybody, because she's an amazing leader, and not that I can't follow anybody, right? But it was like, well, there's something about her where, like, when I talk to her, she gets me, right? Like, there's that unspoken, I've come to her with problems and it was like solved. She's like, Priscilla, like, email me and it's like done, right? And so I feel like I'm losing, an advocate. I feel like I'm losing someone that I have spent many years building a relationship with, and the rugs being pulled out from under me, and especially at this time of year, because we don't know, like, when her last day is going to be, and there's just so much uncertainty. Like, how are you sitting with all this, and what do you think? How do our students may not even feel the difference, right? They may not, at the level that they are at, see a difference, because we'll probably end up shielding them from any thing that we might feel and absorb. But how is that leadership shift sitting with you?
It was definitely tough news to receive. Susanna is just an incredibly special person to me. I would say maybe 10 or 11 years ago, I remember standing in the main office, chatting with her. She was there to pick up her son. Her kids, amazing, like, so much fun to teach those young people. Carmen was in my advisement for 4 years, and just an honor to be connected to that family and to those young people. But we were having a conversation, and somehow the topic of teaching an advanced placement course came up. And at the time, I was kind of on fire about my, cultural responsiveness and anti-racism and that kind of thing. And so I could never, and I told her, I said, I couldn't see myself teaching an AP class. Like, I feel like AP is the epitome of elitism that locks our children out in the cold and only gives access to white students. I just don't feel like I could do that. And she paused for a second, and she grinned, and she looked at me, and she said, what if someone like you taught AP? Like, what if that was you? Wouldn't it be different? And long story short, this is the 12th year that I've been teaching AP World History at my school. She had a way of really seeing us as professionals. And, Susanna and I have not always agreed on things. You referenced the strike of, was it really only like less than 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Oh man, it seems like it was ages ago. But Susanna and I were definitely on different sides of that moment. And but I never felt like I never felt like I lost her respect, and I never lost my respect for her. We would debate things when we would see each other in public. I was at the distinguished teacher. My wife and I were teaching power couple. We were both distinguished teachers last year, and we got to go to the reception. And she came over and said hi. And we had a little debate about education policy right there. And so I always felt like I was viewed as an equal by her, and I was viewed as an important voice, and it helped me hear her a lot more. There are a lot of critiques of Susana. Some of them I think might be fair. Some of them, frankly, I'm not sure that we criticized her white predecessors in the same way that she's been criticized today. This is a point that's been raised on a bunch of different platforms. Is like, man, we were tough on her. Were we as tough on people that came before her? And I think that's a real important question for us to think about in this district and profession. But what it means for our students, you know, under Susana's watch, and I realize that there are a lot of really hardworking people that also, did this work to engage schools and community. But under Susana's watch, we started moving in the direction of, oh, that's not working for your school. What is going to work for your school? Oh, that curriculum isn't culturally relevant. How do we make it more culturally relevant? It just seemed like there's more of a climate for actual exchange between professionals when it came to serving students' needs. Um, Susanna, because of her life path and her professional path, like you said, lifelong educator. This is what she's going to be for the rest of her life, right? Um, she understood questions of equity really, really clearly because she lived those things. And so the concern is, do we then, like, and again, we had differences when it came to policy, when it came to the proper way to address things in our communities. But I always knew that there was an individual in the superintendent's office who would hear me and who would hear people like me and value what we had to say, even if she didn't always agree with us. And I think that's a mark of a great leader. Do you actually take that hard feedback and then be adult enough to maintain a positive relationship with that individual, knowing that you're both committed to your community and to your schools? And so I think there's a lot of pressure on the current school board. I think that the current school board is more visible than it's ever been. And I think that's a good thing. I think everybody needs to know what the board is doing. There's a lot of pressure on them to ensure that they don't mess up this appointment and this kind of interview. So I'm I have high expectations, and I wish her well. As family people, I think we understand that there's always, you just never know what's going to come down the pike for you. You don't know how circumstances are going to change. You certainly don't know that you're going to have a strike and a pandemic in the same 24-month period. And you have to be able to adjust and do the things that are right for yourself and for your family. And I'm not going to get mad at a woman of color who has an opportunity to do something different. Like, I'm just not going to get mad at it, but definitely some questions as we move forward in this moment.
Well, I know I've taken up a lot of your time. I'm going to wind us
Likewise.
down. And first of all, I love your library. I am
Okay.
a big proponent of libraries, especially in BIPOC homes, because
Yeah.
back in the day, many, many decades ago, that was a sign of wealth. Like, the wealthy people had libraries, right?
So true.
And
Yep.
if we could, I always advocate for that in the Black community. You guys need to have a family library that looks just like that.
Yeah.
And it'll make a big difference in our communities. But as we wind down, like, what are your hopes for the future generation? And give me something that has brought you joy during this time of COVID.
So my hopes for the future, um, and I work with the most incredible high school students in the city, in the universe, at the Denver Center for International Studies. And the way I see them earnestly tackling, debating, thinking hard about really important issues in our world today. It just gives me a lot of optimism for how they will face the world when it comes out there, because they don't buy into any of our models. They don't buy into our political dichotomies. They don't buy into conventional understanding. They want to develop their own understanding. That creativity and the resolute determination to make the world a better place when they are able to do so, that's the thing that just gives me so much hope. They're so creative, and I think that if we can encourage them that, hey, so we weren't ready to deal with this, what are you going to create that will help us deal with things like this in the future? And what are you going to do? And I'm just really excited about them. Two things give me joy, one school related, one not. The big thing that gives me joy is every day coming into my second period and watching how they are just so goofy in the chat before we start class. They are so funny. They tell jokes, they say hi to each other, they might make fun of me. It's great. That's how we spend the first like 2 minutes before class starts. And so I just really enjoy, they have their cameras off and they have their mics off, but I see their little comments and it just makes me really happy. There is one thing that happened in my life that really would not have happened if it hadn't been for COVID. And I don't say this to be insensitive. I know that there have been a lot of lives lost in this moment. But my daughter is a youth soccer player, and I was tasked to live stream her games because they had strict restrictions on how many parents could be on the sidelines. So I was like, I'll live stream it. Allows me to be there, run it from my phone. And my dad, who lives out of state, who's never seen her play soccer, hopped on the live stream, and for the first time, and my dad played soccer for his whole life, and so this is third generation like soccer players, and my dad for the first time in my daughter's life got to see her play, and he's like, "Wait, is that her? What number is she?" And told her the number. Wow, she's so tall. What is? Wow, she's really good, and it's kind of like that silver lining. And that's a thing that I'm kind of like, well, wait a minute. I wouldn't have discovered this if there hadn't been COVID. And this is something that maybe I can continue to do for my dad and for family members who just don't feel as close right now. So I think that's a silver lining that I'm really feeling. And I have a community that's so positive and so much fun. And, we will name the hard days, like students are just down some days. They're like, I'm really down. This is really hard. I miss my friends. And we'll sit in that moment and be real about it in that moment. But they are so resilient that they're able to say, okay, what are you going to do today? And just feeling seen. So I think that's that thing. What's giving you that optimism? I want to know.
That, first of all, that was really beautiful. I think, I can resonate with a lot of what you said, but I think these conversations that I've been having with a lot of people, and just really being able to have dedicated time to talk and learn from different individuals. I've had several of these live Zooms, and it just brings me so much joy because I can pretend like I'm like, I can get away from the stress of my day and the lesson plans and all the data points and the MTSS and a lot of the phone calls, and just have like a real engaging conversation around pedagogy and instruction and education, like that. Like when you started out saying like, I could talk about this all day long, like, yes, I could talk about it. I'm not tired of talking about that. I know it's like, what time is it? We're like way over time, but Gerardo Munoz, 2021 Colorado Teacher of the Year. I feel like you need like some kind of like title, like Sir Munoz or something. Like maybe
maybe I could be knighted. That would be cool.
I like anoint you, Sir Munoz. I am so excited that you are representing the education system in Colorado. Your heart, oh my gosh, your kids. I would just love to be one of your students because I can see the love that you have and the fire and the passion, and like that's what we need during this time. Don't lose that, okay, friend?
Thank you.
All right, brother, you go enjoy your Thai.
Thank you. I will. And thank you for just carving out this time. I really enjoyed the conversation. Super fun. But yeah, thank you for the work that you're doing. Also, these stories are so important.
All right, brother, have a good night. Say hi to the family, okay?
Will do. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.